you leave the starting line, everything in your rib cage presses down against your diaphragm. You can't breathe. You're gasping for breath. Your eyes roll back in your head. Your arms feel like they're just being pulled out of their sockets. It's just unbelievable. It's something that you must do to understand.
No man on earth is quicker on two wheels than Russ Collins.
It all started when my dad called me and said, "Do you want to pick up the Sorcerer?" Of course I said yes after a moment of silence. And I quickly put a trailer and truck together and drove up to Los Angeles with a good friend of mine. And lo and behold, there was the Sorcerer in many pieces. And along with it was the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, which he had literally on forklift blades ready to go in a dumpster. My friend tapped me on the shoulder and says, "Russ, the world's first 7-second motorcycle is about to go in a dumpster. Think we can make room in the trailer?" I am definitely not a motorcycle restorer. Of course, I'm a racer, and I can change oil, but I could certainly not restore a drag bike. Not a chance. These are probably the two most difficult motorcycle restorations ever taken on, and they're very, very difficult to work with.
Hey, brother.
Hey.
What's happening? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm David Collins, Russell's, I call him bigger brother. He's actually my older brother. And Russell said to me, I got both of these bikes from my dad, our dad, and this one was a coffee table. And so the only thing there was the 3 engines. And he said, why don't you be responsible for the restoration financially of this one, and I will handle that one, which is a big bike. And we spent 12 years and tens of thousands of dollars between us.
I had to do an awful lot of research. I had to cobble together every article that had ever been written, because there was a lot of good information written in the 70s. Their articles on motorcycles then were much more detailed. They had information about timing, fuel line sizes. My dad had 30 boxes of paper, and I took all of it. Actually, I did myself in when I went public. When I first got the motorcycles, I went public with, I think I'll have these done in a year. Well, that was a hilarious mistake, and then that put the pressure on. So the world knew that I had these motorcycles, and they must be restored. And there were some very rabid fans, if you will, of these motorcycles in their history, and they're not going to let this go. And so I was under that personally applied pressure and all of those external pressures as well. Many people that have been involved, the front forks were donated. The rear wheel was built by a master machinist and totally sponsored, right? And this is all through connections that I've had to build up over the years, because quite honestly, I couldn't afford to put all this together. To be able to actually restore the entire motorcycles was a non-starter for even the most experienced restorers. I needed a fabricator, and when I was looking for help, Kevin Weisenstein said, "You need to look up Robert Prather. He lives around the corner from you." And that's pretty much how we started that deal.
My name is Robert Prather. I'm a fabricator and a painter. I've been working on motorcycles my whole life. I like figuring out things that I don't know how to do. I like stepping out of my comfort zone, and I like learning new things.
Yeah, you could farm work out all throughout all kinds of trades: fabrication, paint, engine building, front wheel guys, rear wheel guys. There's all kinds of specialties out there. But to have one person pull all that together in the same room is, well, it's unheard of.
We did about 99% of all the work here. The painting, the aluminum, the welding. We did about 600 or 700 hours. I had no game plan. I just started putting it together. And the The vehicles will tell you what you need to do, tell you if you've done the right thing. If you've done step 3 before you've done step 1, then you're going to have to take what you put on off and start over. But then you know what step 1 is. So if you make a mistake and you do that before you've done this, you just go back and you got to fix it. It's just part of the process. And especially on things like this where there's no manual. They were built very, very well by people way smarter than me. And they were difficult, but they would only go together one way.
I had a sponsor that worked with me in the sportsman level of motorcycle drag racing named Randy Nelson out of Motorcycle Dynamics. He's an absolute mechanical savant at chassis building. I actually brought the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe idea up to him that we would just wrap a cheap frame around it and make it look pretty, and he wouldn't have any part of it. He said, no, we're going to make it run, and we're going to build the chassis out of chrome moly, like the original. And he was dead serious. It took him a bit, but he got to it, and what you see behind me is his work in the chassis. So we're very grateful.
I guess I got to say that the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe was more challenging because it wasn't all there. The triple, I did rebuild. So this is the triple is kind of my interpretation with a lot of help. So we tried to build a bike back to represent as close as we could to what was built back then, knowing that we couldn't really replicate it. And I tried to keep that in mind through the whole process to not like overdo it or make it too, show quality or something. The plumbing was a difficult process for me to figure it all out and figure out how it worked. And then the bike has the gas injection, so you have several systems going on at once, and it was difficult to figure that out. The hardest part, I think, actually was the starting system. Getting the starter to turn over and not breaking shafts was difficult. The starter is very powerful. It's 36-volt starter, and it goes from 0 to whatever RPMs it is at, and there's no lag to it, there's no clutch. So we just kept snapping shafts off, and we ended up getting 5 of them machined. And I made the first one and I broke it. And so we had to consecutively make stronger and stronger ones, and that's what we did. So most all of it was done here without sending out. I hate sending stuff out. The oil pump, the fuel pump, the shift ram, the injectors, the clutch, the transmission, all of that stuff was brought into motorcycles from outside of the motorcycle world. I guess they were going to make so much horsepower, they were going to break transmissions on the bikes, but as far as I know, that's what they did because they started breaking stuff, I would guess. I mean, you start making 700-800 horsepower, you need more than a motorcycle transmission.
The triple looked like a death machine to me. It was a notoriously poor handling motorcycle. As a matter of fact, as a person standing on the starting line every single time it went down the track, I thought it would be his last run. It was very difficult for a son to watch that. The bike crashed in, I think, May or June of 1976 and did an end over end and almost killed him and put him in the hospital. He was full of Teflon and stainless steel and all ribs gone, crushed lungs. And while he was in the hospital and in a wheelchair, he designed the Sorcerer to go 25 mile an hour faster than the motorcycle that just about killed him. Yeah, there was a time in the 70s when I'd go to breakfast with my dad every morning at a place called Alfie's on Sepulveda Boulevard in Los Angeles, down the street from a place called Hot Rod City, which is where RC Engineering was located, next to Dale Armstrong's shop, which is very famous. These are very famous drag racing people. We would have breakfast with Ed Pink, Keith Black, Joe Paisano, all this, and I knew that I was in the company of greatness, even though I was quite young. just because of the things they had been doing and the level of technical conversation they would have. I remember my dad drawing out on a napkin the Sorcerer's V8 configuration and how we were going to turn the head around backwards, run the blower upside down, and put a Crowder 4-port underneath. And it all sounded pretty nutty to me, and at least half of the people in that group thought, this isn't going to work. But he got enough people in that group to go, yeah, that might work. And one of them was Byron Hines, by the way, who did most of the work to get this thing put together from that original napkin drawing. So there were no blueprints. That was it. They called the Sorcerer his Stradivarius because it was so technologically, and it's such a fine instrument. The Sorcerer is such an incredible piece of technology. My dad couldn't wait to let everyone know that Byron Hines had built this with his own two hands, that he'd only designed it, and of course he wrote it, but he gave the credit where credit was due, and that was Byron Hines. Byron Hines was a very quiet, very unassuming, super humble, brilliant person, obviously. I got to work around him as a teenager, and I saw his handiwork up close and personal. I know he's been on the phone with Robert Prather a number of times guiding us through this process, and particularly on the Sorcerer. I think he thought maybe we were a little crazy on the triple, but he certainly had a lot of input, very helpful input, and I just can't thank him enough.
Talking to Byron is nice, but it's not easy. And it's very intimidating. For me, it was very intimidating because I look up to people like that so much, you know, and so when I talk to him, I get a little nervous and flustered. But Byron was really nice and very helpful, and he told me everything I needed to know.
Clearly the most difficult part in that restoration was the rear engine. And the rear engine on the Sorcerer was blown up. Essentially I had no engine. I needed a rear cylinder head, and that, as it was turned around backwards, had to be welded up and completely remade from basically a block of aluminum. And a couple of people over 2 or 3 years turned us down on recreating that rear cylinder head. And Byron Hines decided he would just do it for us. And he sent that cylinder head to Jay Ashbach of APE.
The head, the way they did this head in the rear is just amazing too. It's not just turned around, you know, it's sliced like a pancake and half of it is turned around. And then it's all welded back together. When Byron built it, he told me that he did it all on a mill with a turntable. He said he didn't use a lathe, and he said he didn't do anything CNC, no computer controlled milling or machining. Well, this bike is almost CNC quality. But what's impressive to me is all this stuff was done by hand with micrometers and calipers and a human's hand and a human's eye. If you look at all these bolts on both sides, these plates, you can swap them back and forth, and there'll be like one bolt that won't go in. This top plate, it goes on here, and there's probably 25 or 30 bolts in it. You can spin it. All of them go in except for one, just one. That is absolutely amazing to me. And they had to change all the oil ports and everything. It's genius. It's absolute genius is what it is. And it humbles me because I look at it and I know how long ago he did it, you know. It's just amazing. It really is amazing. And he said it took him 8 months to build the motor pod while Russ Sr. was in the hospital. It took us over that. It took us 12 years to redo it. So what's that tell you?
I absolutely did feel like giving up many, many times. There was technological issues that no one really had answers for. And I think I even told Robert Prather just about 2 years ago, I was about ready to push spikes off a cliff. I was pretty desperate at times, but I never did anything rash. Obviously, we have both of these behind me and both running. So yes, many, many sleepless nights. Both of these motorcycles are over 10 feet long, multiple engines. It's interesting how these motorcycles became so successful so quickly when they hit the racetrack. And that had a lot to do with my dad incorporating car guy stuff. If you look at what he's done here, this Hillborn fuel injection, all of that stuff these were all car guys. And he surrounded himself with the best in the drag racing world. And you run with those guys, you're going to go fast.
I got a sense of satisfaction, a good, strong sense of satisfaction. I didn't build these bikes, you know. I guess I'm proud of myself, but it's more a sense of a satisfaction of a job well done. I don't know if pride's the right word. Like this one I'm a bit more proud of. This is all my work. All the sheet metal, all the aluminum, you know, all the plumbing, it's all my work. And this one, this is all Byron's work and Russ Collins Sr. And I just put it back together. They built it. They're the ones that should be proud.
The Triple was the very first motorcycle to win the Best Engineering Award by the NHRA.
Mine won it. Yeah. At Englishtown.
Right, Englishtown, 1974. I was there.
The Triple.
And that was the first motorcycle ever. And then the second motorcycle ever was the Sorcerer. So that's 2. And the third one, believe it or not, was Terry Vance's Top Fueler, built at RC Engineering. And the award has never been given to another motorcycle since in that sport. I polled on social media both of these motorcycles just because I was curious. I already knew the answer was going to be the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, even though in my heart it's the Sorcerer. That's my favorite. What I've been told from all the people that chimed in, like a couple thousand, that this was, it looks more like a motorcycle than a Sorcerer.
Ah, that's a good point.
So it looks more like something you would ride. The Sorcerer looks like something not so rideable. So it doesn't look right, and it doesn't look rideable, but I know better. This one's evil handling, and the double goes down the track straight. So I'll take the straight one, thank you. And this is the one he said couldn't be done.
And
My dad told me, don't bother with the Triple. And this guy financed it, and I orchestrated it, if you will. And here it is.
And my dad said, if you're going to ride one of them, ride that one. He says, that one's a handful.
We disagree completely on this one because I watched this one run, and I thought every run was going to be the last that person would ever ride. And the Sorcerer was like a Cadillac. It went straight down the track, very well balanced, very high tech, extraordinary speed and torque.
I was in high school at the time when they built this. I'd go to the supermarket and my dad would be on covers of all the magazines. Absolutely, it was great. I would take these girls over there and we'd get some coffee and say, oh, that's my dad, that's my dad.
Some people called him the Marlboro Man of motorcycle drag racing because he always had that cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he's kind of a badass out there. The whole red, white, and blue leathers. He had that whole very American look to him in a class where everyone was wearing black leathers. He was very large and in charge, very much on stage all the time. My dad was the gunslinger of the Top Fuel class. He was definitely the target. He knew it, and he knew the eyes were on him at all times. My dad came into the motorcycle drag racing world, it started in 1969 when the Honda 750 was introduced. He was working with a Honda shop, I think, in Torrance, California. He realized that Honda 750 was going to be a world beater. I was actually on the crew for that motorcycle for its entire run. I was 14, 15, 16, and 17 during those race days. I actually assisted with the making stainless lines. I would put my foot on the TIG welder as he got underneath the welder, and he'd say more power, less power, and we worked together alone in the shop until 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then I would put my bicycle in the back of the van and we would go home. In 1999, my dad was inducted into the AMA Hall of Fame. It was the inaugural opening of so that was the top of the top. There was probably 50 luminaries from motorsports that were.
And my dad flew us all the kids in, and he's got a lot of kids. So we all got, it was like a family reunion, and he was so proud.
And it was natural for us to just get our children involved. My daughter was timing cams at 13 years old on a pro stock motorcycle. It was a crazy girl accomplishment, if you will. She was gender bending back in the 80s. My son as well ran statistics for my racing team, weather stations, all kinds of good stuff. And now my grandson, he's been working with me on these bikes. In my dad's last days, we talked about what his visions were for these restorations. Actually, he told me it was crazy to rebuild the triple. He told me to kick that to the corner. And we thought otherwise. The Sorcerer had a better shot. He said, I want to make sure people know those still work. Please put the Sorcerer's name back on the front fairing. Those were little things that he asked for. He had a thought that I might ride this thing. So he was giving me riding tips, which I thought was fascinating. And I almost put that little bug in my ear that maybe I could ride this thing if you were crazy enough to do that. And now we've come to our senses in the last 12 years and realized what we have before us, and that would be a great disservice to the original builders of these things. And the promise to my dad was quite thin. Like I mentioned, he didn't think we could even put the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe back together, as many others thought that was an impossibility. But on the Sorcerer, he was very specific about it being seen in public, and I fulfilled that promise. And for us to be able to start it was absolutely a miracle. It's pretty difficult to describe. That sound of the Sorcerer starting was one of the most beautiful mechanical sounds I've ever heard in my life. And to hear it sound just like it did in 1976 and come to full idle with my hands off the motorcycle and run like it did in 1976 was just, I was overcome with emotion. Just talking about it, honestly, it gets me a little teary-eyed because it was, my dad would have been so proud. I've gotten an awful lot of input from the riders of that time, all very congratulatory. And it brought a lot of people in the social media world to tears, and they recorded that. Many documented cases of people crying seeing the Sorcerer start. So it wasn't just me. Without question, my dad would be very emotional to hear this motorcycle run. And I'm sure he'd be very proud of everyone that was involved. You know, I don't think he would have been able to write this script any better.
The fear level is so high that it's the ultimate rush. You start converting fear to thrill because you know that you can control your own fear, and it's not really fear anymore. It's just a rush.